Welcome into Survivor Analytics. I am your host, Clyde, and today we are continuing my coverage of the Traitors US Season 3. I just watched Episode 6, and let me say out of the gate that I'm feeling optimistic with the direction of the season. Is the gameplay messy? Of course. In fact, I'd say that there's a large chunk of the castle that's actively playing against their best interest. At the end of the day, though, the appeal of the Traitors for me is watching these reality stars deceive and backstab one another. I'm not expecting high-quality strategic gameplay, and because of that, I'm already enjoying this season much more than Season 2. But jumping right in, the episode opens with another contentious Traitors meeting. Last week, Carolyn heard from Dylan that Danielle was throwing her name out. I initially thought that Carolyn would take the stealthy approach with this information, keeping that intel to herself, and later using it to flip the vote onto Danielle. Instead, Carolyn walks into the turret, guns blazing. She straight up tells Danielle and Rob that they are the only two players in the castle who she wants to take out of the game. There's a lot to unpack here with Carolyn. I've always been high on her winning chances throughout the season, but this is probably her worst episode thus far. Now, I completely agree with her outlook on Danielle, but I don't understand her decision to confront her in the turret. By calling out Danielle in this section of the episode, Carolyn loses that element of surprise. She gives Danielle the chance to do some damage control with the rest of the castle, so that by the round table, Carolyn is the only player going after her. I also disagree with Carolyn's perception of Boston Rob. As a traitor, you need to put some level of trust into the turret. Obviously, that trust can't go to Danielle, so Rob is the best option. Plus, Boston Rob is very upfront with his tactics. He only targets those players who throw out his name first. He knocks out Bob the drag queen because Bob was supporting the theory that one of the cage guys could be a traitor. Since that round, Rob has remained fully loyal to both Danielle and Carolyn, despite neither of them really reciprocating that trust. Rob's history on Survivor reflects that loyalty as well. In Survivor All-Stars, he makes a promise to ride to the end with Amber, which he fulfills. Then in Survivor Redemption Island, Rob aligns with Philip and Natalie in the pre-merge, and he takes both of them to the final tribal. All of this is to say that Rob awards loyalty in these social strategy games, and I think that it would be in Carolyn's best interest to saddle up alongside him. As for the Traitors' murder decision, three names are brought to the forefront. They consider knocking out Ivor, as he is one of the most obvious faithfuls in the game. Boston Rob also pitches Wes and Bob H, as both of them actively targeted him in the previous round. At the time, I thought that an Ivor boot was the optimal move here. He's not very well connected in the castle, so that play wouldn't create suspicion in any particular direction. I see two main risks with cutting Ivor. The first is that it would leave many of the anti-Rob players in the game. We later see Rob narrowly escape the round table, and had the Traitors removed Ivor, Rob is potentially voted out. Second, Ivor is not an active strategic player. I don't see him ever making a big play, so he seems like the ideal person to ride with to the end. Once again, though, Rob steps in and directs the Traitors' murder decision, this time onto Bob H. Ever since Bob the drag queen exited the game, Boston Rob has gotten his way in every turret meeting. When I first watched this episode, I did not like this move from Boston Rob. Bob H was one of the more vocal players against him at the previous round table, so there was a concern for me that this murder would magnify the target on Boston Rob's back. After taking some time to think a bit more on it, I actually like this play. Boston Rob knows that he's in survival mode. His name is in serious circulation in the castle, so for him to get through the upcoming roundtable, he needs to ensure that the numbers are on his side. Of the three anti-Rob contestants on the board in Derek, Bob H, and Wes, I think that Bob H is the least upfront in targeting Rob. This murder serves to increase Rob's chances of survival with relatively less risk. Why Carolyn and Danielle agreed to this move is beyond me. My guess is that they're willing to concede to Rob's demands and hoping of making him feel comfortable for when they target him later in the season. Moving on to the mission, we had players running around the woods in groups to collect gunpowder, where if the cast acquired a certain amount, the prize pot would increase by $30,000. Also hidden in the wilderness were three shields acquired by Carolyn, Chriselle, and Dylan. Chriselle and Dylan earned their safety through a rock-paper-scissors tournament, which gave everyone in their squads a fair chance. Carolyn just snatches the shield for herself. I was surprised that there was no real social blowback for this decision. I guess that many people perceive Carolyn as this quirky, paranoid player, so it's not a shock when she grabs a shield for herself. It's worth noting that none of the traitors were a part of Chrishelle's group, meaning she holds the only secret shield going into episode 7. I don't see that shield really impacting the game. Chrishelle continues to prove her unwavering support of Boston Rob, so I doubt that he would target her anytime in the near future. So let's take a look at the targeting map leading up to the roundtable. Tom throws out Dolores' name, which is just ridiculous. 4 housewives walked into the castle in episode 1, and Dolores is the only one standing there in episode 6. Tom is essentially claiming that Dolores took on the role of a traitor and immediately cut all of her potential allies. No one really takes Tom's comments seriously. We get a funny dodo edit of him eating alone in the dining room. As I've said all season, Tom has the potential to make a deep run because he will be perceived as a complete non-threat. However, moves like this could jeopardize his time on the show. We also get Carolyn leading the charge against Danielle. I don't think that this was the right time for Carolyn to make this move. To me, it felt like an overreaction to Danielle's play in the previous episode. With that said, I need to credit Carolyn for her connections in the castle. There were multiple players like Dylan, Brittany, and Gabby who all warned Carolyn when Danielle is pitching her name. I'm getting the sense that other people perceive Carolyn as a faithful, but she doesn't hold much strategic agency. It's similar to her experience on Survivor 44, where she maintained this stable alliance with Jam Jam and Carson, but she was the least instrumental to that group's strategic navigation through the season. The big storyline of this episode for me was the battle of the Cage Guys. Derek and Wes are on to Boston Rob, and they believe that now is the time to take their shot. Derek lays out a very strong argument against Rob at the roundtable. He calls back to Bob the Drag Queen's move to vote against Rob in his elimination. He says that if Rob is a faithful, then he was the prime person to knock out after the Bob banishment. If Derek and Wes can push this vote through, then they are in a great spot moving forward. Confirming Rob's identity as a traitor would cement their status as faithfuls, as no one would expect 2 Cage Guys to enter the game as traitors. Boston Rob will never go down without a fight, and he works his magic to push the target onto Wes. Now, given Rob's history on these social strategy shows, I initially expected him to take a Derek-esque approach and provide a strategic argument based in Wes's moves in the castle. Rob knows his audience, though. There are multiple non-strategic characters on this cast, like Chrishelle, Ivor, Sierra, and Tom, who vote primarily based on vibes. Instead, Rob paints Wes as this agent of chaos who is willing to pitch anyone's name as long as it ensures his safety. This emotional appeal works perfectly. Granted, Wes doesn't do himself any favors at the round table, as he claims that he will go after any player who writes down his name. In the end, Boston Rob narrowly wins this battle as he pulls 7 votes together against Wes. Moving forward, Rob still has heat on him. There's at least 3 contestants in Dylan, Chrishelle, and Brittany who appear fully loyal to him. Looking at the 5 votes against Rob, the big 2 to point out are Derek and Danielle. Derek is now perceived as the leader of the anti-Rob movement. Given Rob's hyper-aggressive playstyle, he may look to take out Derek in next week's murder. Meanwhile, Danielle officially takes her stand against Rob with this vote, which is crazy considering that the episode opens with the traitors declaring a truce. We know that Rob is committed to going after those players who target him, and I don't see Danielle taking her name off that list. So Wes is voted out as the 5th banished player this season. Up until this week, I was really impressed with Wes's navigation through the game. I thought that he had done some good work in planting the seeds against Rob without coming forward as the leader of that operation. Even in this episode's roundtable, the edit credits Derek more for that Rob plan than Wes. In the end, though, it seems like Wes's social game kinda tanked his win equity. Most of the other players could not trust him. They saw him as this aggressive strategist who cared more about his personal safety than actually sniffing out the traitors. His defense at the round table solidified that reputation, so I was sad to see Wes go. He was one of my favorite characters on the show, and he made the most of his exit, flipping off the entire cast as he walked out. Here's the strategic layout going into episode 7. There's a new rivalry between Dolores and Tom following Tom's words at the round table. Brittany and Derek also enter an argument towards the end of the episode that ultimately culminates with Brittany declaring her support for Rob and Derek accusing Brittany of being a traitor. As far as the edit is concerned, Ivor and Sierra are just kinda there. I still don't know where their allegiances lie. To wrap up this video, we can run through my weekly tier list outlining every remaining contestant's chances of winning the season. In Zero Chance, we have the same 4 familiar faces. Sam, Sierra, and Ivor barely appear on screen despite them serving as key swing votes in the battle between Boston Rob and Wes. If those 3 were going far in the season, this was the episode to show their insights, yet they remain buried in the edit. Tom, by contrast, is shown playing the game, but he's not respected by the cast, and he's oftentimes incorrect in his reads. Of those 4, I think that Tom has the best chance of making a deep run, but I don't see him winning the whole thing. On to unlikely victories. I got 2 traitors here in Danielle and Boston Rob. Between those 2, I have slightly more confidence in Rob, as there's at least some people in the castle who appear to trust him. I don't know if anyone looks at Danielle as a close ally. While Boston Rob has more people campaigning against him, if he can survive the next couple roundtables, I like his long-term trajectory much more than Danielle. Dolores sits in unlikely victories due to her reputation as an obvious faithful. On one hand, that perception provides Dolores with a lot of safety through banishments, but I think she's towards the top of the Traitors murder list. Next tier is high upside. This week, Derek fails to pull off his big move of the season in voting out Boston Rob. I'd say that he's the Vegas favorite for Rob to target in the next Traitors meeting. With that said, if Derek can win this fight against Rob, he'll earn a lot of favor with the rest of the castle. Gabby continues to fly under the radar. She's got a #1 ally in Chriselle, and she doesn't have any beef with any of the traitors. Then there's Brittany, who had her best episode of the season this week. We get some incredible moments with her poking fun at Tom and clowning Derek in confessionals. This episode highlights her tight relationship with both Boston Rob and Carolyn, so I doubt that she's high on their target list. The only player suspecting Brittany at this point is Derek, who hasn't rallied the rest of the castle behind him. For the 4th week in a row, I got the same 2 players in my contenders tier in Carolyn and Dylan. As I mentioned earlier, this episode was Carolyn's worst showing. I still don't like her move to target Danielle, but considering her social insulation, I need to keep her in this top tier. Episode 6 was a quieter one for Dylan. He still has Boston Rob in the game as his #1 ally, but there is a growing concern for me that he is so starstruck by Rob that he will never flip against him. Given his consistent edit and his widespread connections in the castle, he's got to rank as a contender. So that's everything I got for this week. I'm really enjoying this messy season of the Traitors. You can tune in next week for my strategic summary of episode 7.